more about states. Um, I'm not going to follow the same order that the book follows because I want to make certain argument in a certain order. Okay. So there are many different things that a state does. The book chooses to focus on three. On one side, a state is a source of security, belonging, stability, which is why many people are very skeptical, even when you have a state that is like ruled by a dictator, where some minorities are oppressed, and where things are not exactly working well for the population, because, for example, maybe the economy is not working well, maybe there are a lot of people in poverty. Even in those contexts, there are many people that are skeptical about having a military intervention from outside that violates the sovereignty of that state and try to change things inside the state, or maybe break it up, or for example try to change the ruler of the states to make things better. Why are they afraid? Because when states break down, we don't know exactly what it is that's going to happen. One of the things that could happen is the creation or the disgregation of a failed state. Okay, a failed state is basically a territory where there was a state and now the state doesn't control anything anymore. We've seen before that a state is a monopoly of violence over a territory. Okay, in modern times, for a state to be able to control all the people that live on a territory and what happens on this territory, we need to have institutions such as the military, the police, but also, for example, a functioning road network. If the state cannot access, if the government cannot access different parts of the country, then those parts of the country can easily fall off the grid. It's really hard to get taxes from the people who live in those parts of the country. If something happens, if someone kills someone else, or if someone steals a car and no one can get to that part of country, then you'll understand that easily that part of the country is falling off the grid, and so the state is a failed state. What are examples of failed state that we know also well? Well, it's places like Afghanistan and Somalia, where the state controls maybe the capital city, but then the rest of the country is often controlled by what we often hear. There are these magical words that are used whenever we talk about third world countries, which I detest, which are like they're controlled by clans or by tribes. What's a clan? What's a tribe? It's a family. It's a family of normally rich people. Okay. You probably know the clans or the tribes that there are clans and tribes in Eugene too. There are clans and tribes everywhere. There are clans and tribes in LA. There are clans and tribes in New York. And they try to, the rich people, the rich families, or the rich networks of families. In other periods of time, it was like the Freemasons. Today, you can see associations like the Rotary Club. They try to substitute themselves to the state. But in countries that are not failed states, the power of those families, the power of those clans and tribes doesn't overpower the state. The state is always more powerful, and at least in theory, they should be able to regulate even those families, even if we know all too well that rich people often get away scot-free if they do something bad, or they get into politics, as we also know. Okay, but this is why we talk about failed states, because failed states is about the disgregation of a state. Are states either full states or failed state? No, it's always going to be in between. Every state is going to have a certain level of control of its government. Okay? Some people ask, is America a failed state today? Do you understand why people ask that question? Do you understand why some people might say that America looks a little bit like a failed state in some respect? Or why it doesn't? Now you can answer that question for yourselves. Maybe someone can post an article in your discussion groups asking this question. Other things that states do, other than bringing security, a sense of belonging, especially for nation states, a sense of stability. They are very good at securing rights and representation. So the way that we think of states is being able to create elections, to create political parties on a state basis. We are used to thinking about democracy as a thing rooted in states. Are states the only way that democracy can exist? No, certainly not. You can have democracy with societies organized over a territory without a central government. We can also have democracy in cities, for example. We can have democracy in smaller communities even than cities, like for example, an extended family living somewhere, okay? Like, I don't know, a family that lives in the deep of the Amazon rainforest that doesn't feel as belonging to any state, even if it's part of Brazil or Ecuador. They are some form of political organization and they can be democratic, for example. On the other side, states are also very good machines for authoritarianism and oppression, because a state machine through the government, through police, through the census, through a railroad network, a network of roads, through like government jobs, they are a very good source for controlling the population, which is why some people are, for example, skeptical of big government and say, yeah, if we had big government, we would be just like communist China, where the internet is controlled, for example, okay? And so from here, where do we go? The challenge that states are facing now is the challenge of globalization. We all know what globalization is. Globalization is basically the idea that the whole world is interconnected. And why is the word globalized today and it wasn't before? Well, because we say that today there are more contacts and exchanges from people all around the globe. There are many people of a certain nationality not living in their country, but living in other countries. There are people learning many different languages. There are people trading between different countries. There are people traveling more, okay? So all of this is globalization, and the thing that we can measure it with probably the most is the amount of trade, the way that we trade with each other, especially after the opening of China, starting from the late 70s and then opening even more in the 90s, global trade definitely is on the way up. And it's still expanding today. What's the result of globalization? That nation states lose some power. Multinational corporations gain some power. Who else gains power? International organizations, such as the UN. Are there places in the world where states were formed, but because of the economic